Welcome to the 7th chapter of the book of 1 Corinthians. Paul is continuing now with his instructions to the people in Corinth, the church there, that had sexual immorality and sectarianism and so forth. And now he goes into teaching on marriage. And begins in chapter 1. But concerning what you wrote to me, well, they had written to him earlier, and he had written to them before 1 Corinthians, an earlier letter, because it mentions that in other places that the things that he wrote is mentioned, and then this letter was lost. So the first letter of 1 Corinthians is actually the second, but because it's the only one we have, they call it the first letter of Corinthians. It's good for a man to not touch a woman. Now, here's an interesting thing I think everybody needs to know if you don't know too much about Greek. The word for a woman is gene, and the word for a man is anir, except for anthropo, we get the word anthropology, study of mankind. This is more of a generic man rather than a anir, which is also andros. Anir is also a husband. So whenever it says anir, you can either put in husband or a man. And whenever it has gene, or the form of ginekos, a woman, it could be a wife. The only way you know the difference is by the context that it's talking about. For instance, where Jesus mentions a man who looks upon a woman with lust in his heart has committed adultery. Well, that was a King James, but basically it's a wife, a man who looks on a wife, somebody's wife, commits adultery. Looking on women is fairly common for men, but the subject of that chapter was adultery in marriage. So here we have to look in the context. It's good for a man. Now this is not using anir, it's using anthropos. So a woman would be the one he would be talking about, to not touch a woman. If it was anir, and you try to make it for a husband, it is good for a husband to not touch a ginekos, a wife. Well, that wouldn't make sense because every husband does touch his wife. So, see, here's the problem in going through this and seeing it in context of these words. We'll bring these out as we go through this 7th chapter, a lot of occurrences of anir and gine. But because of the harlotries, porneas, we have pornography. I'm not exactly sure what porneas he's talking about, temptation of a man or a woman for somebody else, or he doesn't mention exactly what he's talking about. He just uses a general term, harlotries. Let each, now there's no man here, I added that, each have his own wife. Not each have his own woman, because if that was the case, then it's like everybody should have a woman, but a wife, gineka. See, his 1135 is the same up here, where it's woman. Let each man, I put man, I could have put husband, have his own wife. And let each, and I have woman here, there's no gine, have her own andra. It wouldn't be, and let every woman have her own man. That wouldn't make sense either. So here we got the usage of husband. And it continues, and we see more proof of that. It says, let to the three husband render for to the wife 5 and 6 the goodwill 8 owed. Well, a woman, a husband and a man and a woman don't have anything owed, but a husband and a wife do. So now it's talking about a husband and wife in marriage. And in like manner also the gine to the andri, the wife to the husband. There's you owe goodwill to each other, you're one person. The gine, the wife, does not exercise over her own body. Now you wouldn't put woman, but the man, well, the man doesn't exercise authority over a woman, but a husband does a wife, and so forth. And in like manner also the anir, the husband, does not exercise authority of his own body. somatic, has to do with the body. So I hope you're picking up on this, and you have to see it in the manner of the context. Idiom, has to do with one's own. Do not deprive one another, allelus, parallel, derivative, except from out of harmony's sake, symphonu, a symphony, a harmony's sake, for a time that you should relax in the fasting and in the prayer. So if you're doing a retreats or things like that, then you take off and you don't have sex intercourse, and this is what it's talking about basically, and for a time, but then you don't want to stay that way. When you come back, it says, and again at the same time you should come together, that Satan should not test you, Satanas, because of your intemperance. Now, I've heard some churches teach that you're only supposed to have sex for procreation, not for fun at all, and they put this down, but I just don't see that that's what the way the Bible here. It's not teaching that it's for only having a baby, but it's part of the human behavior. So it's a gift from God, and it's not only a gift, but we're designed to have intercourse and sex, and if we're married, you're used to it, and but there's times when you don't, what he's saying here, and then there's times when you do. But this I say according to allowance, not according to command. So there's a leeway there, and you have to figure out for yourself which is the right thing to do. For I want all anthropos, this is men, not husbands, but I want all men to be as even myself. So now he's going to the broader anthropos, to be as himself. Apparently some people think he was married because he was a Pharisee and the Pharisees were married. I don't know, but I don't think it mentions a wife. Peter mentions having a wife. But each has his own favor from out of God. Theocracy, ruled by God, is a derivative, theology. One so and another so. So the favors, the gifts of God are various, and one person has one. They can be fine without being married. Another person has problems with the harlotries, I guess, so you call them, what Paul called them, and so he might want to get married. But I say this, lego, to the agamos. Agami is marriage. Bigami, the gami, is marriage, and agami, the alpha, is a negative, like un in English. So agamos is unmarried. And to the hierais, the widows. For it is good for them if they remain as even I. So he's as unmarried. But if they control not, let them marry. Well, this seems a strange reason for getting married, but these are people that were married he's talking about, and if they miss all the things that go along with marriage, then let them marry. If they can handle not doing it, then he says, for it is better to marry than to be set on fire. The pyrusthe, the pyromaniac, pyr has to do with fire. Now, what is being set on fire? It's a figure of speech. We're not set on fire. We're not flaming, but there's a burning inside that a man has. I don't know about women because I'm not a woman. I never have got the slightest idea on how they work. So you can, I'm sure you would know what it's talking about here. And to the ones being married, I exhort, not I, but the Lord. So he's differentiating that he's exhorting, but the Lord is the one that's actually behind it. A wife, a gine ka, apo, from a husband. Now see, there's a wife and a husband, to not separate. It's not talking about a man and a woman. So now you know in the context of 10, as a husband and wife. But if even she should separate, let her remain agamos, or to be reconciled to the andri, to the husband. So basically the idea is to stay in the state of unmarried not to remarried if you're separated. And this is what is the optimum. Now, of course, people don't do that. They get divorced and they remarry, and it's very common. But the Lord, in the Word here and through Paul, gives the optimum. There is places where it mentions that because of a man's weakness, Jesus said that as far as a divorce, wasn't originally that way, but it's allowed in the law of Moses. So there's the optimum and then there's the allowed. A man's wife is not to be let go. So you're not to divorce. And to the rest I say, not the Lord, differentiates that. If any brother has an unbelieving Gineka wife, now it wouldn't be a woman, and she assents to live with him, he is not to leave her. And a woman who has an unbelieving husband and he assents to live with her, she is not to leave him. So he's making separation valid, and I would think that if you're in a relationship with somebody that's physically mistreating you, then leaving that situation, I believe Paul is opening the door to that and is allowing that. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the andri. Since then your children are unclean, but now they are holy, separated. So the state of having one spouse a believer and the other not, I have a good friend that is that way, and the wife loves the Lord, and the man doesn't have a relationship with Jesus, but yet they've been married for a long time. But if the unbeliever separates, let him be separated. But now it doesn't say the believer to separate. The brothers not enslaved are the sisters, so he differentiates the both, the adelphos and the adelphi. Adelphia is adelphos, city of brotherly love. In such cases, but in peace, God has called us. For what do you know, O wife? No, I don't say it's woman. If you shall deliver the husband. Or what do you know, O husband, if you shall deliver the wife? Now, I don't believe the person is, I think King James it says save. The husband and the wife are not the ones that are saving. This is a figure of speech. The vehicle for the instrument for this deliverance is Jesus Christ. But we are an instrument of Christ, and his deliverance is there, and it comes to other people through our telling them. And if it's a marriage situation, then the husband and the wife would be the ones that were the instruments for delivering this. But I mean, you're not delivered, go to heaven because your wife. Except to each as God proportioned, let each three walk as the Lord called. So here he's now differentiating to everybody in the situation that they're in. Some people are single, some people are married, some people are separated, some people are divorced, some people have went into becoming like monks and nuns or so forth in service of the Lord. And so in all the assemblies I set an order. So Paul is setting this order. Ecclesias is a derivative for the assemblies. Who is called while being circumcised now as a Jew. He's talking about if you're a Jew, you're circumcised basically. Generally the people of the nations weren't. Let him not become uncircumcised. Well, that's a figure of speech because you can't become uncircumcised, but let him not become uncircumcised in his relationship to God, cut off. And who is called in uncircumcision, let him not be circumcised. So here we go. And now the Judaizers, people that want people to become like the Jews, and there's a lot of big movement in today where the people trying to recast Christianity to where Judaism by not calling the Lord, but Yahweh, and so forth, going back to the Jewish traditions, the Sabbath, and obeying the Sabbath and this the Sabbath rests, this, in the foods. There is this, but yet here I believe that Paul's setting it straight, that if you are a Jew, well, yeah, you can continue, and if you're not, then you don't have to. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, and he could probably talk about that. So basically, the law of Moses is put secondary to the law of Christ. But keeping the commandments of God, and I put is, the commandments of God are the written out in the Old Testament, but the things of the law are differentiated here in the commandments. Is he talking about the 10 Commandments or other commandments? A lot to this. We see this as we go through and what he says to do and not. Here, uncircumcision is not something you have to do if you're not a Jew. Each in the calling in which he was called. In this, let him meneto, abide. So, however you were called to the Lord, abide. Somebody can be not a believer, be married to another woman. A man could be married to a woman. You both are not believers. Something happens in the relationship, and the man becomes a believer, and the woman doesn't. Well, abide in it. Just live that way. But if the other person leaves, and so be it. A bondman being called, let it not be a care. So now he's going into bondman, almost like a doulos, a slave. It could be a slave. Let it not be a care. So now he's going away from the marriage situation into your social status. But if even you are able to be free, rather use it. So the free one is blessed. It's nice to have freedom. I appreciate the freedom of the United States and being able to go and get the job I want to get and go where I want to go. And if I want to go to school, not work, whatever, this freedom is wonderful, but it's not always been that way. In the United States, it was slavery until 1850s. And today, there's a residue of this level of social level of having slaves, but there is also people that are bondmen. It's not necessarily a slave that's bought and sold. In a way, a person can lose their freedom if they're in prison. If you're in prison, you can't do whatever you want. You don't have freedom. If you're in the army, you don't have freedom to do whatever you want. You're under officers and so forth, and rules and regulation. And so there are other bondmen that's not necessarily always slavery, but it says for the bondman in the being called in the Lord, that is, if you're called and you are a bondman or a slave, is like the Lord's freeman. So he's using this as a kind of a way, well, if you're in one person, even if you are a slave, you're basically not a slave to God. But in like manner also, the free one being called is Christ's bondman. So yeah, so if you're a slave, you're really God's freeman. But if you think you're really free, well, you're really not, because you're Christ's bondman. So to be free in this world and doing things is wonderful, but yet we are in bondage to the things of Christ, to do the things that he would have us to do. Of value you were bought. Of course, we were bought by the death of Jesus Christ. He died for us, paid the penalty for our sins, and allowing us. So there's nothing more precious than the life of our Lord Jesus, to what he did for us. Do not become bondmen of men. Now, here it is. Now, I would think the people in the 1960s, or early 60s, when the civil rights movement was going on, and people saw that they came from slaves, It must have been very difficult then for the people that were slaves to read this Bible because they knew the Bible. I mean, they have a lot of spirituals down south and from the slaves, and they're beautiful. And these people were, I'm sure they wanted to be free, but yet they weren't able to, going through a terrible time when the Civil War went, and then they weren't even free, more or less, in the 60s where I grew up. There was still segregation in, I'm from St. Louis, and close to where I worked downtown St. Louis, there was a state house building, and down in the basement of it, you go through it, and they had these chambers where the slaves were kept and were tied in chains, and that wasn't that long before, about 100 years before. When I grew up in that period of time, and so the people that were then in the civil rights movement, and I know they read this, and they were reading this. It must have been, wow. It's like each in which he was called, brothers, in this abide with God. Well, now they must have gone through a tough time because, I mean, it's like, how do do I do what the Lord said and just sit and take it? Or do I go with the people that were revolting? I don't know who the actual people were, but they were, doing more of a violent type of a revolt against the civil rights movement. It must have been a very difficult time, and the people in the civil rights movement now are my age, and the children are looking at this, and they reading or hearing this, and it's like, well, the parents went through a tough time because, especially if you're a Christian, well, which way do you go? Now he changes again to another different social state, and that was to the unmarried virgins that were under control of a father. The father in those days would decide who they're going to marry, and if they were going to marry or if they're not going to marry. The young girls didn't have the choice, and this still goes on in the world. I had a friend that was from Turkey, and he ended up going, and he was living in the United States. I knew him, and he ended up going back to Turkey, and somebody found a wife for him. Now, some people would say, well, that's just, romanticism is way better than having somebody set up a fixed marriage. But I don't know. The romanticism has got a tremendous amount of divorce. You can go on YouTube and find there's some videos on the Jews, Hasidic Jews today, how they are set up sometimes within a month and who they're going to marry, and they marry, and it works out wonderful. I have children, and it's not all about romance, because a romance can fail, or you can have things in common. Let's say you both like skiing, and fall in love, and you both love skiing, get married, but then the one person breaks a leg, doesn't want to ski anymore, and takes up stamp collecting. The other person hates stamp collecting, but wants to do everything and try to get the other person to do it. And all of a sudden, whammo, the relationship breaks apart if it's just built on common likes and so forth. So, but this period of time, apparently, the father had the control, and they called it the virgin. The woman was, of course, had not had sex, and so she was a virgin. The Parthenon in the city of Athens, the capital, and the large building to the virgin. I do not have a command of the Lord. Well, so he's just basically giving his opinion here, he says. But a gnomi, opinion I give as one being shown mercy by the Lord to be trustworthy. I think then this existing is good because of the present necessity, that it's good for a man, anthropo, not a husband, so to be. So this is one of the advantages of the Apostolic Bible. You can see the Greek. Right away, you can see it's not on here. If somebody used a man there, it wouldn't be right. Excuse me. Have you been tied to a wife? Do not seek a loosening. Have you been untied from a ginekos? Do not seek a gineka. But if also you should marry, you sin not. And if the virgin should have married, she sinned not. But affliction in the flesh, such shall have. But I spare you. Well, the marriage is not easy because two people want different things, man and a woman. So it's not an easy thing to be married. But this I say, Adelphi, the remaining time is wrapping up. And so it is here, but we know it went 2,000 years on because we're living here in 2015. But he's showing that in this time of that they were living in for the early Christians, that he's saying it's wrapping up. Of course, our lives are wrapping up because they'll die, but that also the one having wives should be as not having, and the ones weeping as not weeping, and the ones rejoicing as not rejoicing. So don't take everything for granted. The Lord is going to change a lot of things, especially with the early church. People suffered persecutions, had to leave, and they had problems with the one believing and not the other one believing. And boy, just don't set your heart on any one thing because of the time was terrible. The ones agorazontes, buying is not holding possessions, the agora, the marketplace. So don't even think the things that you have are that set in stone. You're always going to have them. The ones dealing in this world is not abusing it. So you want to step lightly in this world because it says, for the condition of this cosmo, a world, a schema, we have a scheme, something set down, of this world, cosmos, passes by. But I want you to be free from care. Well, the unmarried is anxious for the things of the Lord, how he is pleasing to the Lord. And I am unmarried, and I am free. I can spend all day doing things for the Lord, studying for the Bible, and going out and having a cup of coffee, taking my computer and going through the next chapter 8, studying it, spending hours, then going home and hopping in my car, going to Staples and look for something I might need to do the seminar, and then I go and have a lunch, and then I do whatever I want to do. I don't have a wife that I says, well, you got to come back here at 10:30 and wash the windows. And after you get done washing the windows, then we need to go to the store, and all kinds of things like that. And that's part of being married. But the marriage part is good. There's a lot of advantages to marriage. You have children, running around, and when you get old and decrepit, you have somebody that can help you, and have some children that are interested in you and you're interested in them. You have a companionship of your mate, sharing things. Like somebody said, one of the saddest things he did was look at the Grand Canyon and all of its beauty without anybody else. A storm in the Grand Canyon, couldn't share it with anybody. How can you share that unless you're there with somebody and you have sharing? And then you takes care of lonesomeness. You have a wife. Sex drive, it takes care of the sex drive. And you have somebody, you're in need, you break your leg like I did. I'm sitting at home and I had to hobble around the best I could, but you have somebody go make you soup and brings it to you, and that's really neat. And psychologically, you have problems at work, and you come home and you're just sitting there pounding your head against the wall. Oh man, this is just terrible. And then instead you have a wife who you can pound your head against her instead, or vice versa. But the one married is anxious for the thing of the world, how he pleases the wife. So yeah, you are doing that. You're so forth in the mainly the. I don't know if the one married is anxious for the things of the world, how he pleases the wife. Doesn't say how the wife pleases the husband, interestingly. The wife and the virgin are assigned apart. Gini, the Parthenos. The agamos, unmarried, is anxious for the things of the Lord. I'm anxious to get these things done and video. Right now I'm developing some bags, jute bags to be covers over the Bibles that I sell and to send out, and have a nice jute bag with a logo. I'm out looking for a spray, a little spray gun, and different parts. I'm able to do that. And then the unmarried is anxious for the things of the Lord, that she might be holy. Now it's talking about the woman, both in body and in spirit. So a woman doesn't have to worry about the man doing, wanting things, sexual things in the body, and in spirit, dealing with men's attitudes and so forth. But she, having married, is anxious for the things of the world, how she shall please the husband. So the marriage of the woman is she wants to please the husband. But this for your own advantage I speak, not that I should put a noose around you, but to be undisturbed to the decent and well-occupied thing to the Lord. So he's trying to show that, the best thing to the Lord is, he's pointing out. But if anyone thinks to be disgraced over his virgin, if she should be advanced in year, I don't know, maybe in the 30s or something like that, and so it ought to be, whatever he wants to do, he sins not. Let them marry. So I don't know if a woman wants to get married and she's advanced, exactly what he's talking about to the fine details here, but basically the father is the one that gives in marriage. But the one who stands settled in the heart, cardia, we have a cardiac arrest, the heart, not having necessity, but has authority concerning his own will, and this he has judged in his heart to give heed to his own virgin, well, he does. So if he decides it's not right, she doesn't need to be married, the best not to be married for whatever reason, he may know that then this is okay for him to think that way. And it's like I'm saying, this is a different time than it is today, 2,000 years later. So that also the one given in marriage does well. Now, giving in marriage is the father. And the one not giving in marriage does better. So basically, being single and spending your time with the Lord is what he's saying here. But giving in marriage is okay. A wife is tied by law for as long as a time, chronon, we have chronology, time. A wife is tied by the nomo, astronomy, the law of the stars. The nomo is a derivative, nomi, as her husband lives. Anir is not a man. But if her husband should sleep, now here we mentioned before, to sleep, some people remember we were mentioning about Lazarus being in Abraham's bosom, and I see that as before the people sleeping in the Lord. The Lazarus was in front of the rich man's house. We don't know when, because Jesus brings this out. It could have been a story he's telling that he heard. I don't know. But anyway, the Jews may have been in a different place, in Abraham's bosom, where the believers they go to sleep. Because it says here, the husband should sleep. And like when the other Lazarus that died from Mary and Martha's brother, the Lord said he went there to awake him from the sleep. And these disciples said, well, if he's asleep, then he's going to get better. And he said, well, then he's dead. So sleeping dead, she is free to whom she wants to marry, only in the Lord. So if you're married and your husband dies, or vice versa, then you're to marry somebody in the Lord. And the people then, when they get to heaven, apparently won't be a problem. You look on the earth, it would be, if you be a problem because you'd know that somebody else was having your wife, but that you don't know because you're asleep. And so when you get to heaven, it all work out. I don't know how the Lord's going to do it, but it'll be interesting, I'm sure. But more blessed is she, if so she should remain, according to my opinion, that is unmarried. But I think I also have spirit of God. So the things of that Paul is bringing out here in marriage and the social state and the problems that have to do with the early church. And then he goes in next into conscience of maybe something's allowed, but our conscience dictates certain things to us when we maybe shouldn't do something, even if we can or could, that we might not. And we're going to be going into that into the 8th chapter, and I hope you'll join us, and God bless.